Well, today Raven showed us that not all updates go out at 10 a.m. Pacific time like they normally do, as an update dropped at 11 a.m. Eastern, which is 8 a.m. Pacific, and 4 p.m. in the UK. But this update came along with the long-awaited weapons tuning pass for things like the Amax, the Fara, and other weapons that we were told about at the beginning of Season 3, but really had no timetable for. Admittedly, I'm a little surprised this wasn't held off until the mid-season update, since normally weapon tuning passes are usually hand-in-hand with a title update, but this one actually was just a playlist update, so you didn't have to download anything, you'd end up just being prompted to restart your game, and then you'd be good to go. But what changed with these weapons? Today we're going to break down everything that did change out of this weapons tuning update for things like your attachments, your weapons, and even things like your ground loot spawns. So as we go along, let me know your thoughts down below. What do you guys think of this update so far? Are you guys liking it? Maybe not so much. Whatever it is, feel free to let me know your thoughts down below. As well, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like down below. And of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. We're on that road to 500,000 subscribers. So if you guys would like to see a video with all things Warzone and anything COD related, we'll keep it to with all of it. So if you guys are interested in joining the community, I'd love to have you. And finally, my friends over at G Fuel bumped up code ESPRESSO to 30% off your entire order. So if you guys want to get a restock or check it out for the first time, click the link in the description below. But let's talk about this update. So like we mentioned a second ago here, the nice part is that you don't need to download anything in particular for this update. If you happen to be online when it rolled out, you'd simply be asked to restart your game and you'd have a playlist update to follow, then be able to jump right back into the action. So a pleasant surprise there that you don't need to download anything. But in terms of what the update held, it had changes to loot spawns, weapon tuning, and even attachment tuning, with a mention of some more attachments coming to Cold War weapons or equivalents for Cold War weapons. So let's run down this here. For the loot adjustments, we saw that the Street Sweeper was entirely removed from ground loot and cache spawns. This means that common, uncommon, rare, and epic variations of the weapon will no longer be available for immediate use within Warzone, which personally I think is nice. I hated landing, finding like an M60 or something that was inferior to it, only to be decimated by a guy who picked up a 12+ round Street Sweeper. And granted, that's kind of the variance of BR at play, but while it was one, not only just annoying, two, we also got a full explanation given by Raven, stating a little further as to the design intent here to remove this, saying the Street Sweeper's wide availability fostered a dynamic where passive play was incentivized and rewarded. We do not think this is the type of play that is particularly compelling for either party when players do not have the necessary tools in the early game to effectively counter it. So basically saying that you could sit in a corner and just absolutely destroy anybody that came through a doorway, and I understand that entirely. So that was something that was removed here, and in place of that, the CR-57 was actually added to the ground loot, with common and uncommon variants being added to the ground loot level weaponry, and a rare variation being added into supply caches. Then coming along to the weapons category, the biggest of the bunch here with this was something we saw a couple of weapons changed, but they prefaced this section by saying that there will always be something to address, and that it truly is a tall task to balance weapons where millions of players use each of them. So to find that nice common ground for everybody, but they stated also they feel they're close to a balanced homeostasis where most options for weaponry are at least viable. And I think for the most part, and for the first time in a while, I kind of agree with that. I mean, for our seasonal top 10 video that we did here at the beginning of Season 3, that was the first time in as long as I can remember that all 10 weapons that we talked about were actually viable weapons, that one didn't clearly outclass the other. So they then continue on to say that they're addressing weapons in today's update as an effort to address TTK, or time to kill, and raise that skill ceiling. So firstly, even if you don't agree with these changes, I at least appreciate an upfront answer and some sort of reasoning and explanation. The last few patch notes I think have been doing a very good job with giving insight, and even again, if I don't agree with the change, I at least see some understanding as to the intended viewpoint in which that change was made, which is definitely nice and appreciated. But first on the chopping block was the CR-56 Amax. And for as highly anticipated of a change as this was, quantity-wise, there may not be as many changes as you'd expect, because we only actually got one in which the minimum damage for the CR-56 Amax was decreased from 32 to 31. And again, they gave an explanation here with this, saying, with a great damage profile, locational multipliers, and manageable recoil, the CR-56 Amax was able to reliably reach extreme TTKs at long range. This change reduces its fastest minimum damage TTK by about 17%, in addition to its slowest minimum damage TTK by an additional shot. Its fastest maximum damage TTK, however, remains intact. So they're kind of trying to play this so that at a distance, it's not as crazy a weapon as it was. So you may feel this at, again, those longer ranges, but for the most part, the weapon still remains, to me at least, a more highly skilled weapon as opposed to others that we've seen, where the recoil definitely takes some time to manage, and Master, but if you can do so, you can still absolutely shred through your enemies. Then we also saw that the Fara was changed, in which that had a headshot multiplier decrease from 1.5 to 1.35. So a minimal change here, but a noticeable one likely whenever you get into some of these engagements. They also changed the base ADS move speed and decreased that by 7%, saying that when combined with mobility-based stocks, the Fara 83 was capable of reaching exceedingly fast ADS firing speeds, and that with that, they found it a little bit too versatile, and as a part of, again, that effort to increase the overall time to kill, with that headshot multiplier decrease, that changed the TTK by 16.6%. The Street Sweeper was also on the chopping block. In addition to it being removed from the ground loot, we saw that there was a base hipfire spread increase, there was a recoil increase, and an ADS speed reduction, with reasoning behind that saying that it was a little bit too effective given the rate of fire and ammo capacity when compared to the other weapons in its class of other shotguns, with an overall goal of giving enemies a little bit more time to react. Submachine guns here, we ended up seeing two changed in particular, in which we saw the Bullfrog and the PPSH rounding out the overall base weaponry adjustments here for this update, but the Bullfrog ended up having a maximum damage decrease from 34 to 32, a maximum damage range increase by 11%, a base move speed increase by 1%, and a sprint out speed increase by 13%. The reasoning behind this one was also something mentioned that they don't feel like it's an outright nerf, which if you look at that is kind of the case here. I mean, you have a maximum damage range increase, you have a base movement speed buff here by 1%, and a sprint out speed buff by 13%, but you have that maximum damage decrease from 34 to 32. So at a distance, you'll be able to see that differentiation here at this, but it is something that was changed here no less. The PPSH was on the chopping block as well, being adjusted in the maximum damage range, getting an increase by 4%, and the open bolt delay decreased by 80%. Now, I'd have to go in and test this to see how it feels comparatively, but that's a huge difference because that open bolt delay would be cause for much of that seeming sprint to fire delay, where you don't really have that split second where you're right into the action and therefore could get you killed. But that is something that was changed here at this and is a huge change on paper. Now, jumping over to specific attachments, we ended up seeing a handful of these adjusted across the barrels, optics, and stocks categories. So for this, we'll start out with the barrels. The combat recon on the sniper weapons only had a bullet velocity multiplier increase by 12% and an ADS idle sway multiplier decrease by 33.3%. So becoming a little bit more viable in that if you are playing with the snipers. But the interesting note here is that they say as we continue to assess the place of Cold War snipers within Warzone, we've realized there is much work to be done. In addition to improving the overall efficacy of these weapons and attachments, we will also be taking a close look at their optics. This includes addressing attachment pros where there are a few, if any, use cases. In specific, we may see a Cold War equivalent to an immensely popular Modern Warfare sniper attachment very soon. Now, they don't give any specifics here for this, but it is something that, while I'm thrown off a little bit by the mention of the optics for snipers, one thing that I do hope comes over as an equivalent is something of a tac laser for snipers within Cold War snipers, because that was one of the big things that really made snipers within Modern Warfare weaponry viable in different playstyles, is that you had a tac laser that increased the ADS speed, aiming stability, and walking steadiness, so giving you a little bit more of that gun up speed, which was favorable. The only things that really adjust your ADS speeds within Cold War weaponry is that of your rear grips, which comparatively you also have in Modern Warfare weaponry, rear grips adjusting ADS speed, stocks adjusting ADS speed, lasers adjusting ADS speed, even some magazine attachments. The one that always comes to my mind is the 60 round mag on the Bruin, and in some cases even some barrels end up adjusting those ADS speeds. So there's definitely some differentiation between Cold War and Modern Warfare weaponry attachments. But moving on, the optics for the Cold War AK-47, the axial arms 3x optic had a behavior improvement. And then finally closing out attachments are some stocks for assault rifles, LMGs, shotguns, snipers, and submachine guns. For the assault rifles, LMGs, shotguns, and snipers, the Raider and KGB skeletal stocks had an ADS firing speed multiplier decreased by 75% and an ADS move speed multiplier decreased by 10%. So kind of gutting these. The Raider and KGB skeletal stock for the submachine guns had some adjustments and reductions like that, but not to the same extent, in which the ADS firing speed multiplier was decreased by 50% rather than 75%, and the ADS move speed multiplier was decreased by 10% again. The SAS combat and Spetsnaz stock for the assault rifles, LMGs, shotguns, and snipers had an ADS firing speed multiplier decreased by 75% and an ADS move speed multiplier decreased by 10%, just like that skeletal stock, and same with the SAS ADS combat stock and Spetsnaz stock for the SMGs. Changed in the same regard, but not to the same severity, in which you have a 50% and a 10% decrease. And then finally, the tactical stock for assault rifles, LMGs, shotguns, and snipers ended up having a move speed multiplier decrease while ADS by 75%. And on the submachine guns, the same attachment will have an ADS move speed multiplier decrease by 50%. So kind of across the board here, you have those reductions, but those final two stocks, which are absolutely probably the most used and helpful with weaponry, have been changed by quite a bit. So you definitely will notice this when jumping in if you equip either of these. So that may be a change in some of your meta builds here for this, but that closes out the changes that we ended up seeing on the front of the weapon tuning as of today. They finally close out this set of patch notes by saying that they're going to be starting to look more at modern warfare weapons as well. The past couple of months, of course, have been trying to make Cold War weaponry in line with modern warfare, so you have a nice balance of weapons. But now that we're finally getting to that point, modern warfare will have some weapons that may not be getting much use, have some buffs to them, and maybe some nerfs as well. So overall, I think I'm okay with this update. Things like your CR-56 Amax still are absolutely viable. The Fara 83 still pretty good as well, though changed slightly. So these weapon adjustments were definitely needed, but not anything that really gutted them to the point of, well, that seems a bit excessive. And again, coming back to it, I do think that we do have that nice variance in terms of weaponry available that can be viable in most certain situations. And it seems like Raven is really trying to hit down on these niche categories of gameplay where some weapons will absolutely flourish in others, but can still do the job in others. And for that, I think I'm okay with that. Obviously, jumping in over the course of the next couple of days to weeks will prove a little bit more insightful as to how balanced this truly is, but right now on paper, I'm okay with it. But that said, that's where we're going to wrap it up. That's the update here at hand, and that's where I want to turn it over to you guys. What do you think of this update so far? Do you like the changes made either on paper or in game? Maybe not so much. Whatever it is, feel free to let me know your thoughts down below. But hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to drop a like down below. And of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Warzone and anything COD related. We'll keep you up to date with absolutely all of it. If you're interested also in following me over on Twitter and Instagram, those are the best places to get connected outside of YouTube. Practice on both those. If you guys want to check my conversation, ask me a question, whatever it may be, that link is down there in the description below. That said, thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.